What if everything you thought you knew about history was only half the truth? Secrets of Lost Black Gods Revealed takes you deep into ancient myths, forgotten kingdoms, and suppressed spiritual traditions to uncover the divine legacy of powerful black deities erased from mainstream narratives. These aren't just stories. They're echoes of a spiritual past that shaped civilizations across Africa and beyond. From Kemet to Kush, from Olmec to Orisha, discover the untold truths they never wanted you to know. Get ready to reclaim history, identity, and power. The time to remember the gods of our ancestors has come. The lost gods of a forgotten legacy. Across the sands of ancient Africa, the jungles of the Americas, and the highlands of early civilizations, stories of powerful deities once echoed through chants, rituals, and sacred texts. These weren't just gods. They were expressions of power, identity, and divine connection. They were creators, protectors, and destroyers. They were black gods. But somewhere along the timeline of human history, many of these divine figures disappeared. Colonial conquest, religious imperialism, and cultural suppression erased them from memory. The result? Generations of people have grown up unaware of the sacred pantheon that once guided their ancestors. The question is, why were these black gods hidden? And what truths do they reveal today? Let's embark on a journey to rediscover the forgotten, silenced, and purposefully erased spiritual identities of the ancient black world. 1. The sacred black. Why skin tone and divinity were once one. In ancient cultures, blackness was not a curse, it was sacred. Across Africa, color symbolism played a crucial spiritual role. In ancient Kemet, Egypt, for example, the color black represented fertility, resurrection, and divine power. The very word for Egypt, Kemet, means a black land, referencing both the rich soil of the Nile and the dark-skinned people who inhabited it. Gods like Osiris, often depicted with black or green skin, symbolized death and rebirth. His blackness wasn't a racial marker. It was a spiritual badge of divine transformation. Meanwhile, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the afterlife, was portrayed with black skin to reflect his dominion over the spiritual realm. These depictions weren't coincidental. They formed a sacred cosmology that linked blackness to godliness, a concept later vilified and erased. 2. Suppressed by conquest. The colonial erasure of black divinity. The transatlantic slave trade and colonial conquest weren't just economic or territorial missions. They were spiritual wars. Missionaries and colonizers understood that to control a people, you had to first dismantle their spiritual identity. In the Americas, African slaves brought rich religious traditions with them: Vodun voodoo, Ifa, Orisha worship, and more. But these were quickly demonized, outlawed, or forcibly blended into European Christianity through syncretism. Powerful deities like Shango, Ogun, Yemaya, and Elegua were reframed as evil spirits or mistaken for saints. In Africa itself, the imposition of Western religions and civilizing missions painted ancestral worship and indigenous deities as barbaric or devilish. Schools taught children that their traditional beliefs were primitive, and churches banned practices that had existed for millennia. The effect was devastating. Generations grew up believing their gods were not holy, but hellish. 3. Kemet's gods. The sacred blueprint hidden in plain sight. No discussion of lost black gods can ignore Kemet, the land now called Egypt. Modern narratives have largely whitewashed Egyptian identity, portraying its civilization as separate from the rest of Africa. But ancient Kemet was undeniably African in origin and spiritual tradition. Deities like Ra, the black sun god, source of all life; Hathor, goddess of beauty and music, often linked to the mother goddess archetype found across the continent; Ma'at, the personification of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Thoth, the divine scribe and keeper of wisdom, were all part of a deeply symbolic spiritual system that shaped not only African societies, but also Greek, Roman, and even Abrahamic thought. The Greeks studied in Egyptian temples. Their gods mirrored Egyptian forms. But over time, as European narratives rebranded history, Kemet's spiritual legacy was disconnected from its African roots, and with it, the black gods were exiled from collective memory. For Orishas and the Yoruba pantheon, a living lineage of divinity. Unlike many ancient pantheons, the Yoruba spiritual system remains vibrant and alive today. The Orishas, divine entities who serve as intermediaries between humanity and the supreme creator, Olodumare, form one of the most well-preserved expressions of African divinity. Each Orisha governs a specific domain. Shango, god of thunder, justice, and masculine power. Ashen, goddess of love, fertility, and rivers. Ogun, god of iron, war, and technology. Yemaya, mother of oceans and protector of women. Despite centuries of colonial and Christian suppression, the Orisha system survived through resistance, resilience, and adaptation. In Cuba, Brazil, Trinidad, and Haiti, the gods lived on in new forms: Santeria, Candomblé, Vodou, cloaked in Catholic saints, but spiritually unchanged. These black gods refuse to be forgotten. Their continued worship challenges the notion that African spirituality died out. It simply evolved. 5. Hidden gods of the Americas. Black divinity before slavery. Even before the arrival of enslaved Africans, there's evidence that black gods, or at least black divine figures, were known in the Americas. The Olmec civilization of ancient Mexico, predating the Aztecs and Maya, left behind colossal stone heads with unmistakably African features. While scholars debate their origins, many believe they represent deified African visitors or rulers. In early Mesoamerican myths, black or dark-skinned gods appear as creators or destroyers, especially associated with the underworld or cosmic rebirth. Could these stories point to a lost connection between African migrants and American indigenous spirituality? If so, the presence of black gods in the Americas predates slavery, and colonial history becomes even more fragile. 6. The Ethiopian Mysteries. Guardians of hidden truth. Ethiopia holds a unique position in global spiritual history. Home to one of the world's oldest Christian traditions, it also preserves ancient Judaic customs and, according to local lore, even pre-flood spiritual knowledge. Texts like the Kebra Nagast speak of divine bloodlines, heavenly visitations, and rulers descended from gods. Ethiopian iconography often portrays holy figures, including angels and Christ himself, as black. These depictions weren't political. They were simply reflective of the people's spiritual worldview. Ethiopia also holds apocryphal texts not found in the Western Bible, including lost books of Enoch, Jubilees, and others, many of which describe heavenly beings, watchers, and godly entities with divine missions and cosmic power. Could these be echoes of ancient African gods remembered in another form? 7. Why the black gods were hidden. The systematic erasure of black divinity wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Psychological warfare. By stripping people of their gods, colonizers removed spiritual confidence and cultural pride. Control through doctrine. Enforcing a single image of God, white, male, European-looking, instilled a hierarchy that placed whiteness at the top of both spiritual and societal orders. Economic manipulation. Religion was used to justify slavery and colonization. A people who believed their gods were evil were easier to convert, control, and commodify. Cultural reset. By erasing divine figures, entire cosmologies and ethical systems were replaced, making room for foreign ideologies to dominate. In short, the lost black gods weren't just forgotten. They were forcibly hidden to maintain systems of oppression. 8. The rise of remembering, a new spiritual renaissance. Today, there's a global movement to reclaim the sacred. Across Africa, the Caribbean, and the diaspora, people are returning to ancestral spirituality, not out of rebellion, but as a journey of reconnection. Scholars are unearthing ancient African cosmologies long dismissed by academia. Artists are reviving imagery of orishas, Cometian gods, and divine black archetypes. Spiritual practitioners are relearning the rituals, languages, and oral traditions of their ancestors. This is more than a cultural trend. It's a spiritual awakening, a quiet revolution rooted in remembrance. The lost black gods are no longer lost. Their names are being spoken. Their symbols are reappearing. Their power is reawakening, remembering the divine within. The story of the lost black gods is not just about myth, it's about memory. It's about how power shapes history, and how history shapes identity. When you remember that your ancestors once communed with gods who looked like them, who were them, you remember something deeper, your own sacredness. You reconnect with a time when blackness was not vilified but venerated, when spiritual systems were built not on fear, but on balance, justice, and harmony. The rediscovery of these divine figures isn't just an act of history, it's an act of healing. In a world still grappling with the scars of colonialism, racism, and spiritual disconnection, remembering the lost black gods is a step toward wholeness. And so we speak their names again, not to worship the past, but to ignite the future. The power of remembrance. The story of the lost black gods is not simply a tale of mythology or spiritual curiosity. It is a profound testament to the power of memory. Beneath the layers of conquest, colonization, and conversion lies a deeper truth, that remembering is itself an act of resistance. Remembering is power. For centuries, the spiritual systems of black people, especially in Africa and its diasporas, were demonized, erased, or co-opted. Gods who once ruled over the forces of nature, morality, creation, and war were cast aside in favor of foreign deities, and their worshippers forced into silence or secrecy. But these gods were never truly lost. They lived in stories, in symbols, in dreams, and in the sacred practices whispered from generation to generation. Today, as people awaken to the richness of their ancestral roots, the act of remembering these divine figures becomes more than academic. It becomes spiritual, emotional, and liberating. To remember them is to remember the divine within yourself. 1. Myth and memory, more than just stories. In every society, myths serve a purpose beyond entertainment. They are the architecture of a people's worldview. Myths explain the origins of the world, the values of a culture, and the relationship between humanity and the divine. In ancient Africa, mythology was not separate from daily life, it was embedded in it. The gods were not distant figures on golden thrones. They were present in rivers, mountains, storms, and dreams. They walked among the people, and sometimes they were the people. When colonizers arrived and deemed African myths as pagan or superstitious, they weren't just discrediting stories. They were dismantling entire worldviews. They were rewriting memory. This severed black people from their spiritual ancestors, casting doubt on the sacred traditions that once gave them strength, balance, and identity. To remember those myths today is to repair the fracture in the soul of a people. It is to recover stolen memory and restore spiritual sovereignty. 2. The shaping of history. Who gets to be divine? History is not always written by the victors. It is often written by those who control the narrative. In the case of black spiritual systems, this narrative has been violently manipulated. When European colonizers and missionaries encountered powerful African kingdoms and intricate religious systems, they were confronted with undeniable evidence of a rich and complex civilization. But to justify colonization, they needed to dehumanize and delegitimize those they conquered. One of the most effective tools of dehumanization was spiritual erasure. Gods who looked like black people, who embodied black values, black beauty, black wisdom, had to be made invisible or evil. The divine had to become pale, distant, and foreign. The message was clear. Divinity does not look like you. It does not live within you. This theological colonization infected the subconscious of generations. But the question must now be asked: what happens when you reverse the narrative? What happens when you remember that your ancestors not only believed in gods who looked like them, but were made in the image of those gods? You begin to reclaim the sacred. You begin to heal. 3. The divine in our image. Identity and ancestral reflection. In many ancient African systems, the boundary between human and divine was thin, sometimes indistinguishable. Kings were seen as descendants of gods. Priests served as spiritual intermediaries. Warriors, midwives, griots, and elders were often guided by ancestral spirits or divine energy. This worldview affirmed a core truth: you are not separate from the sacred. You are a vessel of it. In the Yoruba tradition, for instance, people are born with a spiritual essence called Ori, a divine consciousness that connects them to their destiny and to the Orishas. In Kemet, ancient Egypt, the Ka life force and Ba soul were considered extensions of divine energy within each individual. The implications are profound. If you are divine in essence, then every part of you, your skin, your voice, your history, is sacred. This challenges the narrative that black identity is something to be escaped or reformed. Instead, it is something to be remembered and honored. 4. Colonization and the spiritual disconnect. The damage of colonization wasn't just economic or political. It was spiritual. By replacing ancestral belief systems with Western religions, colonizers inserted a new hierarchy. God above, white man next, black man below. Spirituality became a tool of control, and salvation was redefined as assimilation. But what was lost in that process? The communal rituals that connected people to the earth and ancestors. The divine feminine, once honored through goddesses like Ashen, Mami Wada, or Hathor. The harmony between spiritual and physical health. The sacred arts of storytelling, song, and dance as forms of worship. The belief that the divine dwells within, not only above. This disconnect didn't just hurt the individual. It fragmented communities. It turned sacred altars into shameful secrets. It turned gods into devils. And most tragically, it made generations forget their own holiness. 5. Remembering as healing, reclaiming the sacred. To remember the divine within is not merely intellectual. It is therapeutic. It is a form of spiritual decolonization. This healing begins with knowledge. Reading about the Orishas, the Neteru of Kemet, the Dogon cosmology, or Ethiopian sacred texts can open doors to long-forgotten truths. It continues with practice. Lighting candles, speaking to ancestors, embracing rituals once deemed witchcraft, but rooted in reverence. It culminates in transformation. When black people begin to see themselves not as spiritual outsiders, but as divine inheritors, something awakens. Confidence returns. Cultural pride is restored. Community becomes sacred again. Identity shifts from survival to sovereignty. This is why remembering lost black gods is so powerful. It doesn't just change what you believe. It changes who you believe yourself to be. 6. The role of ancestral connection. African spirituality is deeply ancestral. To speak to your ancestors is not necromancy. It is communion. The ancestors are not gone. They are guides. They live in memory, blood, story, and spirit. When you remember divine ancestors, those who were kings, queens, warriors, healers, and yes, gods, you don't worship them. You honor them. You draw strength from their victories, learn from their mistakes, and walk with their wisdom. Many people today, especially in the diaspora, feel a spiritual void. They yearn for a connection that Western religion often doesn't fulfill. That yearning is not misplaced. It is ancestral memory calling out across time, asking to be reawakened. 7. The rebirth of sacred identity in the modern world. The renaissance of African spirituality is growing. From Brooklyn to Lagos, from Kingston to Johannesburg, people are lighting candles to Yamaya, invoking the name of Ma'at, praying with cowrie shells, drumming the rhythms of divine invocation. This is more than nostalgia. It's a revolution, a quiet, spiritual revolution that says, we are not broken. We were made to forget, but now we choose to remember. In art, music, scholarship, and ceremony, the divine is returning, not in a way that replaces existing beliefs, but in a way that restores balance. For many, the return to African spirituality does not mean abandoning all else. It means rerouting in a tradition that affirms their full humanity. 8. Facing the future with the wisdom of the past. The challenges of today, systemic racism, environmental collapse, identity crises, cannot be solved with politics alone. They require spiritual clarity. They require a return to the values that once governed the ancestors. Balance with nature. Respect for the feminine and the masculine. Communal harmony over individual greed. Sacred reverence for life and death. A recognition that we are divine reflections of creation itself. By remembering the divine within, we don't just recover the past. We create a future grounded in truth, healing, and spiritual resilience. Conclusion. The sacred is not lost. It is remembered. The story of the lost black gods is not about gods disappearing into myth. It's about the silencing of memory. But memory is not easily killed. It lingers. It waits. And now it returns. To remember the divine within is to say, I am not a mistake. I am not broken. I am not forgotten. I come from a line of gods, of creators, of sacred wisdom keepers. I carry their fire in my breath, their rhythm in my heartbeat, their dreams in my bones. This act of remembering is sacred. It is revolutionary. And it is necessary. Because in a world built to make you forget who you are, remembering is the most divine thing you can do. You've just scratched the surface of a forgotten truth, the secrets of lost black gods revealed. These ancient deities were more than myths. They were symbols of power, wisdom, and divine identity. Erased by colonizers and hidden by time, their stories are now rising from the ashes. If this awakens something in you, don't let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe to keep this sacred knowledge alive. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What truths do you think still remain buried? Until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and remember, our history didn't start with chains. It began with divinity.